Welcome to the show. My guest today, the CEO of PNM Resources, covering parts of New Mexico and Texas, Pat Collawn. Pat, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Of course, we happen to operate in Colorado a little bit at the same time. That's kind of fun when you were a public service company. Now Excel, and well, was it Excel Energy then or not?
It transitioned. I showed up the day and my boss pulled me in his office and said, by the way, we're doing a merger. It's my first day at public service company.
So you serve, one of the things that's really fascinating, you serve, of course, customers in New Mexico, also in Texas. And I'd like to talk about the difference in those markets, because in Texas, and probably I would guess you serve around, well, almost 800,000 customers. So probably something on the order of almost 2 million people?
Yes.
Would you guess? So, of course, you have, both are regulated in different ways. And one of the fascinating things I'd like to talk to you about is how retail markets are changing in energy, where customers actually have, in some places, the ability to pick their energy provider, which we don't have in Colorado, and you don't have in New Mexico. But you do have in Texas. So tell me about what's going on there.
I think different states have made different choices, right? And one of the things that makes this country unique is 50 states and the fact that states make a lot of decisions on their own. And Texas made the decision some time ago to go to deregulation. I think they did it very thoughtfully, and it has given customers here a choice. Mexico, and actually I was in Colorado when they looked at it, decided that that wasn't the right regulatory schema for them. And so they have kept their markets regulated. But I think one of the things we say in New Mexico is, even though our customers don't have the choice of a provider, we want to behave like if they did have a choice, we'd be the choice. And I also think customers are exhibiting choice in other ways, even in a regulated market. They have choices for distributed generation. They have choices for solar. They have choices for billing options. So I think customers are wanting more of a choice. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a different provider, but it may be a different generation source. You know, it may be a different way to save energy. And so I think you're going to see a lot more of that, and there are other people moving into our space that we can partner with to help serve our customers better.
So tell me how it works if I'm one of your Texas customers. What are my actual choices? What decisions do I get to make?
In Texas, you get to make the choice about who provides your power, right? So which retail provider it is. And if you look at those different retail providers, you go on their websites, they have different choices. You can have fixed prices, you can have variable prices, you know, you can have one where you can buy renewable energy credits, you can have a time of day pricing. So there's lots of those kind of choices, which lots of people like to make. But then there's also, you can get the basic old-fashioned, right? You pay by the kilowatt hour. So they have all of those choices here in Texas and in some other states.
So when I make those choices, from a customer perspective, someone hearing this for the first time is thinking, well, wait a minute, there's only one set of underground lines or one set of utility poles. How does that work? Because I'm not going to have 5 different companies bringing equipment and different wires to my house.
Excellent question. Small trivia point. If you go to Lubbock, Texas, there are 2 sets of poles and wires in the street. It used to be SPS, Excel, and then the city of Lubbock. They have since decided that 2 sets of electric wires were not the best thing. But if you look at our industry, there's the generation, right? There's whether it's nuclear or coal or natural gas or wind, there's that piece. And in Texas, that's competitive. Then there's the transmission and distribution, right, that brings it to your home. That's what's regulated in Texas. And then there's the retail electric provider. So no matter who you choose from in Texas, it's coming over that same set of wires to your house. And that's the segment we operate in Texas, is that transmission and distribution segment. So our customers are responsible for picking their power supplier. We're responsible for getting it to them reliably.
So give me your sense, looking ahead 10 or 20 years, what will electrical power markets look like for both retail, residential customers and commercial customers? And let's do 20 years. Let's not do 10.
20 years. Okay. I think that customers will have a lot more options, whether they're residential or commercial, in 20 years. Doesn't necessarily mean deregulation, but if you look at all the investments that we're putting in our energy grid, folks will have a choice on how to manage their electricity, if they want their own solar panels, if they want to buy 100% wind. I think we're going to be much more connected. We're going to have smart street lights. We'll have sensors in the roads to help traffic flow. We'll have buildings that, that are lights turn on and off automatically. All the buildings are going to have controls, so they'll be very efficient. So I think there's a lot of that technology that's coming, but I think it'll come in a way that's seamless to the customer, because you don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff, right? There's so many other things to do out there. And so I think working together with technology partners, generation partners, it's going to have this very seamless, interconnected world. And I think a lot more of it is going to be powered by electricity, right? We'll have electric vehicles, we'll have new appliances. There's lots of applications that may make more sense from both a carbon standpoint and a price standpoint to electrify. And so I think we're going to see that.
So in terms of, how about in terms of demand for electricity? Because on the one hand you have a tremendous number of greater efficiencies, you have all kinds of ways of delivering power more efficiently, of consuming power more efficiently. At the same time, you have all these devices now that can consume power. You look at on the transportation sector as more and more electric cars, plug-ins, et cetera, get made and used. How does it end up? Not that it ends, but I mean, again, in 20 years, what does it look like?
Well, I'm going to let our friends at Sarah actually do the energy forecasting, right? There's a joke in our industry that, a good way to get fired is to, forecast load and gas prices. But I do think you will see energy efficiency continue to be a big driver, both on the commercial side, the industrial side, and the residential side. On the commercial and industrial side, much of it is driven by economics. And on the residential side, there's an economic driver there too. But I also think the younger generation is much more conscious about how much they use of everything, right? Whether it's electricity or gas or a plastic bag. So you're going to continue to see that go down. But we will have new things. We will have electric vehicles. We will have electrification. That helps bring the load back up. But I also think one of the things that's happening in our business is we transition our fleets to cleaner generation. We still have base load, so we still need our nuclear, we still need our natural gas. But a lot of the new resources we're bringing on are smaller in size, and they're more flexible, so we can adapt to changing load in this industry much faster than we have been able to in the past.
So when you say smaller in size, give me some examples.
Gas plants, right? We run big coal plants, right? 2,000, 4,000 megawatts. If you look at the size of a gas plant now, 50 megawatts, we now use reciprocating engines for peaking purposes. There's work on small modular reactors in the nuclear size, right? Anywhere from 50 megawatts to about 250 megawatts. Storage is going to help us do smaller. So all of those kind of things help shrink the size and allow us to bring things on in smaller chunks, which help us to meet the demand.
And also lower incrementally the cost in terms of the type of investment you need at any one time, I assume.
Absolutely. A 250 megawatt plant is a lot cheaper than a 2,500 megawatt plant.
So last question, I know we have to go to a break. One of the really interesting aspects when you look at total consumption or total demand is when you mentioned electric cars. And of course, if you had everybody recharging during the day, your peak demands would go sky high. Yes. So is it possible that one scenario, or do you see as a primary scenario where actually total demand for power goes up, but because a lot of that then is, that demand is occurring at night when people in 20 years are recharging their electric cars, you have a kind of a smoother load over the course of 24 hours?
I think that the charging will be done in a very efficient manner and that we will come to that scenario that you talked about. California, for example, probably has the highest penetration of electric vehicles, and they are spending a lot of resources into when and how people charge, right? So maybe they charge in the middle of the day when their solar is over generating. Maybe they charge at night, but it's not just about the where you charge, but it's about when you charge. Typically you'd go home and you'd plug your car in. Maybe you get cheaper electricity, free electricity. Maybe we even pay you to charge right at 11 in the morning, But if you want to charge at 5 at night, it's very expensive. So that work is going on at the utilities out there, and it's very exciting.
Well, and actually in California, there have been times when they are giving away electricity.
Yes, and my customers have been the beneficiary of that. So we do like that, but we understand it's probably not a good thing long term. So.
All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back with Pat in just a moment.
There's more of the Aaron Harber Show after this.
The issue for utilities is just making sure we're paid for the value of that grid. Because even if you have solar panels, you still need us, right, to start your air conditioner. You need us to sell your power back. As we move into this more interconnected future with devices, the grid is central to everything we do.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbortv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today. I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbortv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching. Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. Because I've never done endorsements or commercials, people ask how are our programs funded, especially because we provide them as a public service to all our broadcast outlets. It's expensive to produce our show, whether we do them here in Denver or go to places such as Aspen, Washington, D.C., or even Iraq. The answer is we depend on contributions to support our work to bring you some of the nation's top opinion leaders. Individuals, businesses, foundations, and other nonprofits make tax-deductible contributions to the Democracy and Media Education Foundation to help allow us to continue to work for you. To find out more or to make a donation, just go to dmefd.org. The DMEF is a tax-exempt public charitable organization and has promised to dedicate 100% of every contribution to support our public affairs initiatives. If you believe as I do in the need for a forum which promotes civil discourse and mutually respectful discussion, I hope you'll decide to make a contribution today. I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Pat Collawn of PNM Resources. And I want to know, what do you think the government could do to accelerate some of these processes, both on the research side in terms of advancing technology, but also on the regulatory side in terms of encouraging more choice and more diversification?
Well, I think on the research side, if you look at some of the things that the Department of Energy is doing, they're doing some amazing work on storage and batteries. And I think that what they're starting to do now is reach out more to industry to work on commercializing these things. And I think that when the DOE does its research function, that goes very well. It's amazing work there. On the regulatory side, one of the issues for our industry has been is our regulatory processes are litigious and contentious, right? We have hearings, we have witnesses, we have depositions. It's not the best way to plan for a future electric system. So I think we're all working with our regulators to figure out how to have a process that's more collaborative but still fair. Our regulators have a tough job. They need to make sure that we are spending the exact right of money on prudent things so that our customers don't pay more for electricity than they should. And they've done a good job. We have some of the lowest rates in the world in our country. So it's figuring out how to make that process more collaborative. And I think utilities are starting to lead the way. We all have what's called an integrated resource plan and process. It's a very public, collaborative process that, depending on your state, my state, we do it every 3 years, brings people in to talk about what the future of your generation portfolio looks like. I think we need to kind of expand that process to think about what our grid looks like and what customer services look like.
So one of the things you've done, you've led an effort on the greenhouse gas emission side in terms of objectives to phase out the use of coal-fired plants. Tell me about your planning, the success you've had for starters, and I have a couple follow-up questions.
We do have an integrated resource plan process in New Mexico. We do it every 3 years, and when we did the one in 2017, the numbers spoke. And you run, as you can imagine, thousands of scenarios in terms of gas prices, carbon prices, coal prices, customer demand. And between the change in demand and the gas prices being so dramatically lower, it said makes sense to get out of coal. What drove the timing for us is that we have 2 coal plants, and they both have mine mouth coal, and we had participation agreements because we don't own plants by ourselves in the West, and coal contracts. And so when the coal contract and the participation agreements were up in San Juan in 2022, that's when you get out, 4 Corners, 2031. So there was a lot of public participation on that. There are some folks that say we'd like to do it sooner, but A, you have commercial agreements, and B, we need to make sure we work with the folks in those communities. These are heavily oil and gas and coal communities. 4 Corners is on the Navajo land, to make sure that we can help those workers transition to new jobs. Because those jobs in a coal mine or a power plant are good jobs, and we need to make sure that they're trained to take a different job.
All right, well, you were really in a fortunate position because the coal-fired plants that were providing electricity to your customers, you didn't own, and you had contracts for. So you had that ability to leave when the contract ended. A lot of utilities, of course, own their plants. What's your take on the retirement of plants when they really have potentially many years of life ahead of them? Is anyone doing really a life cycle analysis? Because certainly a coal-fired plant has significantly more emissions. But if you look at the greenhouse gas or the environmental impact of constructing a new plant, the cement that's used and everything else, it's really quite considerable. So I'd be really interested in your take on that. And also just financially, the idea of closing a facility that could really be beneficial for a number of years.
We actually do own our plants. I'm sorry, was not clear there. We have coal contracts. But when we do all of our planning...
So it was a coal contract?
It was a coal contract
ended.
that ends, yes. But when all utilities do their planning, we assume that we will recover any of the undepreciated cost in that plant. And even when you make that assumption, it is cheaper to go to, whether it's a gas-fired plant, whether it's some renewables. So all those costs are taken into account. I think one of the other things, though, you're seeing is the age of our coal fleet is getting up there. So a lot of the coal plants are fully depreciated or getting towards the point that they're depreciated. So it's time to build new generation.
So you're, just so that, to be clear, so really you're, and most utilities are in a position when they retire a plant, and even if they retire it before its potential end life, you've already recouped the costs of construction. Ratepayers have already covered everything.
In most instances, yes, or there would be some undepreciated costs there that you work with your regulators on how you recover those. But I think that the other thing that's going on is that our consumers are driving this decision too, right? Like I said, our integrated resource plan, the numbers were what they were. But our customers are expressing an interest in cleaner generation. And now they can have cleaner generation that's lower cost. That's what they want.
So speaking of customers, I mean, of course, one of the challenges that utilities face is are issues related to customers who have their own solar panels, who are generating electricity, want to send it back to the grid. Of course, customers like the idea of being paid the retail price for that energy. Most utilities would prefer that they pay the wholesale price. Where are you? Where is PNN on all of this?
Well, we work very well with our customers that have distributed solar and customer-sided solar, and we actually have just continued to improve our processes so we can hook them up quickly. The issue for utilities is just making sure we're paid for the value of that grid, because even if you have solar panels, you still need us, right, to start your air conditioner. You need us to sell your power back. As we move into this more interconnected future with devices, the grid is central to everything we do. So on a state-by-state basis, utilities work differently in terms of how they recover those costs. Some states have changed net energy metering. Some have gone to the retail price as opposed to the wholesale price. In our state, we're still doing net energy metering and paying that other price, but our volume trues up when we do a rate case. So I think most states are coming to the conclusion that the grid needs to be paid for, but again, it's done differently in every state.
How about the status of the grid? What's your take on what needs to be done? There are so many huge national issues. What are some of those, and how do they impact utility, either of the utilities that you operate?
Well, we are very fortunate in this country to have the electricity system that we have. And I think what you are seeing is more hardening of the grid, right? If you, for example, if you look at our friends that are hurricane prone, they take the lessons learned from each hurricane. I think Florida Power and Light would tell you that their restoration was a lot faster this time because of all the hardening that they have done. We'll do our lessons learned after Harvey and Irma. And we're continuing to make those hardening, and then we're continuing to make sure the grid works for all this cool new technology. If you talk to our friends in California, right, they're doing a lot of work around EV charging, for example. And the grid, it's really central to everything we do. So I think a lot of the focus used to be on generation planning. Now it's on grid planning.
All right, we're going to take our last break. We'll be right back with Pat Collawn in just a moment.
There's more of the Aaron Harber Show after this.
It's about smart lighting, smart transportation, smart buildings. And again, this will be seamless to the customers, but will be safer, more secure, more efficient, and less carbon intensive.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbortv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today.
The Rexall Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rexall Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again.
Join me and watch the Aaron Harber Show.
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 I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch the Aaron Harber Show and Keep Hope Alive.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. We're with Pat Collawn. So I'm really interested because you have a nuclear power plant in your portfolio. So what's your take on nuclear power in general? Where's it headed? But also your experience.
Okay. Nuclear power is just, I think, a critical generation source to our country. Baseload, carbon-free, and I applaud the work that Southern Company is doing and the ability to finish that reactor. It's a very, very critical piece of our generation portfolio, and I think some of the states have been doing some great work in terms of ensuring that those plants stay online, right? There's always that short-term, long-term tug, and those folks that are looking ahead, I applaud them. In terms of Palo Verde, we own 10% of Palo Verde that's out there in near Phoenix. It has been a wonderful resource for it. It's extremely well run. Again, it's carbon-free. It's baseload, and we're excited to have it in our portfolio. What we are trying to all do, not just at Palo Verde and others, is work with the environmental community to make sure they continue to support nuclear power. And I sometimes talk to my local folks, and I said, well, if you don't like coal, boy, I hope you like nuclear because there's no NOx, there's no SOx, and people don't understand some of those issues. And I think also people got worried about nuclear power after Fukushima. And when we tell the story of what we did in the US and the difference, people listen. So we just need to keep educating people on the value of nuclear.
At the same time, certainly to build a nuclear plant today requires billions of dollars. You're looking at all kinds of government subsidies. You're looking at waivers in terms of liability limits. So when you factor all those in, it looks like if you're trying to create a level playing field, nuclear power is way behind. Is that not a fair assessment?
Well, I think you're right. The scale of a nuclear power plant is vast, and it is expensive. But I think there's a security issue, a national security issue behind having nuclear power. We want to make sure we have that capability in our country. We still can't run a system without baseload power, right? Our storage isn't there. And if you look at every form of generation, there's a subsidy in, right? There's lots of charts, and depending upon who does them, they'll show you the subsidies. So I think it's a wise decision to keep nuclear in our portfolio. And there's also some great work being done on the small modular reactors, right, which can bring nuclear power at a less of a scale. And I think that's important work for us to do too. But we need to take a look at the country as a whole and say, what do we need for our energy future and our energy security?
All right, talking about our energy future, talk a little bit about smart cities and where you think we're going with that.
Smart cities is a very exciting arena. At EEI, we issued a Smart Cities Challenge to all of our member companies.
Edison Electric Institute.
Excuse me, thank you. Yes, Edison Electric Institute, to our member companies to say, we want you to pledge to do one thing with a community or city to be a smart community. We have 80% of our members there. And it can be as simple as LED streetlights, electric buses in Albuquerque, or if you go to Columbus, they are transforming that city. It's about smart lighting, smart transportation, smart buildings. And again, this will be seamless to the customers, but will be safer, more secure, more efficient, and less carbon intensive. So it's a real growing area. There's lots of folks overseas that are working on this. I think you're going to hear more conversation about this. Our convention at Edison Electric Institute this coming year is in San Diego, and one of the things we're going to be able to do is look at all the great work San Diego has done. I mean, they have decarbonized their ports, for example. They had a bunch of diesel tugs. Those are all electric now. And while one could say, well, why should a utility do that, right? It benefits the shipping companies. The folks that live along the port are less affluent. So it helped clean up that local air. So it's those kind of benefits that we're really being able to see.
All right, I know we only have a minute left. I apologize, but I want to get to diversity and inclusion, especially given everything going on in the country today.
Well, the other focus area I have as EEI chair is diversity and inclusion. And this industry has long known that we need to reflect the diversity of our customers and done a wonderful job on that. And if you look, for example, at the regulated utilities, 22% of the CEOs are female. I think that's probably an industry-leading statistic. And we're working together to try to put together a handbook of best practices so that we can all learn from each other. In order to attract a future workforce, we're going to have to be diverse and inclusive. I think this younger generation is going to demand it. We compete for talent with Facebook and Google and Disney. I had a colleague say, my gosh, I lost an employee to Disney. We need to have our basic purpose of clean, reliable, and affordable power. We're so lucky in this country. You travel the world. You know what it's like not to have power. That is a sense of purpose we need to translate to that next generation and that show them that we are diverse and inclusive. That'll help to attract the next generation of workers.
All right, Pat, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, that was Pat Collawn, the CEO, President, and Chairman of PNM Resources, covering parts of New Mexico and Texas and serving approximately 2 million people. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.